Okay, everyone, we're going to get started real quick here.
Thank you. So for those of you who may not know, I'm Sue Russell, President of Oakshot's Garden Club. And this is Taylor from the town, from the Sustainability Department. So we do these joint sessions from time to time where there are topics of mutual interest. It's a way to save some money, especially for the Garden Club people, because we don't have to pay for a room. And it's a way of promoting the Garden Club, but also for the Sustainability Department, they do a lot of green living workshops. So this counts as one of their workshops. So tonight we're going to do tomato growing in this very tricky, lovely climate, as you can see outside. You know, really springtime, it's just beautiful. Daffodils are blooming. So at great expense, I brought my husband Colin, and I had to travel really far, all the way from Westridge Rise. So it's a continuing interest. Growing tomatoes here is a little bit trickier. We used to live up north in Fort McMurray. Colin found it way easier in Fort McMurray than it is out here, but we have learned and prevailed. Anyway, so I will turn it over to Colin.
I'm just gonna quickly do some housekeeping stuff for the online, because we have our hybrid system going. So for those online, if they want to type their questions in the chat, and we'll try and get to them. For those of you that are joining us here live today, if you have a question when Colin lets us ask questions, if you want to put your hand up so I can get you into the microphone so they can hear you online, so we're not repeating questions and all that fun stuff. And I did want to touch on our next workshop that is going to be on xeriscaping, which is actually happening next Wednesday already. So it's coming up quick. So it's already online there and you can register right now, right after this. So,
and I will just add a word to that. Next month, we are going to be doing a session that we should have done in January, which is lawn alternatives. So the xeriscaping and the lawn alternatives are sort of companion workshops. Mike Dorian will be doing it. He's from the city of Calgary. All things to do with soil and alternatives, xeriscaping. He is like the expert everybody turns to. So it should be really interesting. So that's April the 3rd, the first Monday in April. Okay, you'll learn more about that later anyway.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Taylor.
Yeah.
All right.
Colin, go ahead.
Good. Thanks very much for everybody showing up this evening. And I'll certainly try and ask questions at the end of each slide. And I'm quite intimidated this evening because I know there's a lot of Garden Club members here who are very good growers and probably know as much, if not more, about tomato growers than I grow. But I think we'll have a fun evening anyway. And if anybody's got any suggestions as I go through and I've missed something, please just shout up and we'll make sure folks know. So tomato growing, the growing of tomatoes is probably one of the most popular vegetables or fruits, whatever you want to call it, in the whole of North America. It is just such a common vegetable to grow because I think, you know, they are so popular. So this is generally what I'm going to cover tonight in terms of an agenda. You'll hear me, and you've heard Susan's accent and my accent, so I will flip from saying tomato or tomato, whatever comes up. We all know what we're talking about, I hope. I certainly wasn't going to sing the song. So, simple question. Is it a fruit or is it a vegetable? It's a fruit, is it? Okay. So I think it really depends on who you ask. So if you ask a chef, he's going to tell you it's a vegetable the way he prepares it. But technically, yes, you're right. A botanist will answer and tell you it's a fruit. And technically, it's an entity developed from the fertilized ovary of a flower is a fruit. I know we often say if it's got seeds in it, then it has to be a fruit. But technically, it's not quite true because there are tomato plants without any tomato fruit without any seeds as well. Move over. Up. Over here. Right there. Oh my goodness. There we go.
Wave to the lovely folks on that.
Thank you. All right. Okay. I've been told. So this will be a test at the end of the evening. You all know me better than that. I put up the taxonomic classification for a very particular purpose. It's important to know the family that the tomato comes from, Solanaceae, simply because you want to avoid multiple sowings of similar plants. And I will talk a little bit about it later on. So similar plants are very particularly peppers, tomatoes, potatoes, and eggplant are all of the same family. And if you continue to successively plant in the same area or using the same soil, you will end up with the likelihood of proneness to late blight and other bacterial diseases. They're our tomatoes, are they? Oh, yes, they are. Yeah, sure. They are. A few of them. So this is what, on the right-hand side, is what my dining room table is about to shortly look like. It's full of plant seeds now, and hopefully they'll eventually get to this before I eventually put them out into my greenhouse. So timing for the workshop tonight is perfect in terms of if you're interested in going and buying seeds to plant seeds now, the middle of March to the end of March, even beginning of April is a perfect time to be planting seeds. I have started some of mine already. I will be honest, a dozen plants or so, because I know at the beginning of May I will start to heat my greenhouse and have overnight frost protection in the greenhouse. So pretty simple. You can use some basic seed trays. I will advise to use a good premium grow mix like ProMix BX. They do an HP one as well. I think the BX is fine. And the Sunshine Mix number 4. They are more than just peat mixes. They usually have things like mycorrhiza in there and other products as well. And they're very good quality, and it does help to avoid things like damp off that happens on young plants when you're growing. So fill the seed trays with some moist soil. You don't want it overly wet, and just sow the seeds about 1/2 centimeter deep. It's more than sufficient. A very simple antifungal compound is cinnamon. It's a natural fungal compound, and there used to be a product on the market called Damp Off. It's no longer available, and it was a chemical product. This is far simpler, and if you use a good quality peat mix, seed mix with some cinnamon, you'll cover and prevent a lot of damp off occurring, and you'll see white fungus occurring on your soil. And if your plants are growing and they're thin at the bottom of the plant, you know you're starting to get damp off occurring, and they generally won't, they're not recoverable. While it's still a seed, it is a good idea to use a heat mat to raise the soil temperature. The one thing I will say is keep an eye on the soil being damp. I just dried a seed tray or 2 out myself in the past week, and I know I've had to reseed some leeks that I was growing at the same time. So, it is a little bit easy to dry out seed trays. As I said as well before, put a cling wrap over it or a plastic cover. Once they've germinated and the seed is through, you can take the cling wrap or the cover off, and certainly remove the heat from the seed tray. Otherwise, they tend to grow a bit long in the legs, especially tomato plants, a bit leggy. It's not going to kill them, and you can certainly manage with it. And then once they're germinated, they're really looking for 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. Or a grow light for most of us at this time of the year. You want to water lightly, keep applying a little bit of cinnamon. And if you want to use a little bit of plant starter fertilizer, you'll see it's got a very high second number. So you're looking for something like a 1052 10 fertilizer, because you want to establish the roots of the new plant. Questions? Okay, sure.
How do you heat your greenhouse?
So I only have a small greenhouse and I use a small electric heater. It's a sort of, I think, a 1500 watt heater that's thermostatically controlled.
How do I stop the seedlings from being stringy?
So that's part of the issue. If you continue to use a heat mat as the seed germinates, they will go leggy. You want to be able to remove that heat and just give it some sunlight and just a little bit of water, and they shouldn't be leggy. And it's not a problem if the plants are leggy. I'll give you a suggestion later on about what to deal with leggy tomato plants.
I have found that if they are getting tall and skinny and leggy, if you put a little fan so that they get a breeze, it seems to strengthen the stems on the plants, just because if they were outside, they'd have the wind, and the wind acts as a natural,
Okay,
yeah,
sure.
stem thickener.
There you go.
So a little fan.
Thanks, Bev.
Any recommendations for grow lights?
I will come back to it. So the name that's the popular grow light in Canada is a company called Sunblaster. They don't sell directly. They'll only sell through garden centers like Spruce It Up. And I know Garden Retreat actually sells the 4 foot, 2 foot, and I think 1 foot strip lights that are made by a company called Sunblaster. And they now sell a product line that's LED, which is a little bit more energy efficient. Okay, any other questions? Good. All right, so I'm going to quickly mention some seeds. I don't think these are any different than some of the vegetable recommendations I've made in previous presentations. We are very fortunate in Canada. We have an awful lot of exceedingly good seed suppliers across the country. You'll see in a lot of the local garden centers will certainly sell West Coast seeds. I know Spruce It Up does. I know Greengate does. Gorilla Garden Supplies by Siemens Stadium sells West Coast seeds. For most of us who've been buying seeds from catalogs from over the years, places like TNT Seeds out of Manitoba, Early's from Saskatchewan are very good seed catalogs. And you know, I brought a couple along with me that I use sort of every year, and you can just pass them around if you're not familiar with them. I'll put one here and I'll do one this side. You know, West Coast Seeds is a great source of, they've got a few anecdotes and comments in there about how to grow the vegetables, and they're very useful. So look at the tomato seeds that's supplied. There's local ones for Alberta, such as Wild Rose Seeds, but there's an absolute ton out there. I'm just throwing up some that I've used over the years. I think I've used almost all of these. I added Rainbow Seeds this year from New Brunswick simply because I was looking for one variety of tomato that I couldn't get anywhere else. So, you know, I had to go with West Coast Seeds. It stopped selling it. And in the box stores, there is absolutely nothing wrong with the seeds from Mackenzie, the burpee seeds that you get, and Mr. Fotheringill's, and somebody's just luckily gave me a Mackenzie seed tonight. They're perfect seeds. There's absolutely nothing wrong with them at all. I will say, when you're looking for seeds, just check the bottom of the plant of the packets there where it says, it'll tell you the days of germination. Really, it's the days from transplant to harvest, but there's no consistency between a lot of the seed companies, unfortunately. And I'll mention it later on. And it will also tell you, you'll notice the letters OP or F1. And the seeds are generally either a hybrid seed where the two varieties have been cross-pollinated, or they're open pollinated and it's the same variety being pollinated. So my general advice for those people that don't have a greenhouse is try and keep to days beyond, less than 75 days. That's a fairly long time. And you'll see that our last frost day is, do you know when? On average? Yeah, it's like June the 10th or 7th. I'll have the date down here later on. But it's very late. And that date, 50% of the time you're before that date, and 50% of the time you're after that date. And tomato plants do not like any sign of frost whatsoever. So you're going to look at, I'll get into choosing seeds and plants later. There's two main varieties that you want to be paying attention to: determinate, often called bush, or indeterminate, frequently called vine types. And as they say, the vine types, the indeterminates, are going to grow as high as 10, 12 feet high easily, if you want to let them grow that high. And a bush type will generally grow wide in a bush shape about 3 feet high. And they're also slightly different the way they produce, and I'll talk about that again later as well. And once you've bought seeds and you're not going to use, most of these seed packets will come with 25 to 50 seeds. I think I can see one there on the bottom that says 35 seeds. If you're going to sow 3 or 4 plants, seal the packet up, keep the seeds for next year. They'll all keep. The big difference between heirlooms and open pollinated versus F1 hybrids is open pollinated and heirlooms are actually open pollinated. The seeds from the fruit can be dried out and kept and planted, and they will provide you a true plant of the same variety next year. If you buy an F1 hybrid, you will very likely end up with one of the parents, not the hybrid version that you get if you plant that seed. So generally, if you're going to look for an F1 hybrid, buy new seeds of that variety each year. Questions before I move on? We're good?
Is there any annual seed exchange events in Calgary?
So I believe there's a seed exchange in the hillside area. And I think that's the only one I know of. Hillhurst, sorry, thank you, Hillhurst, near Sunnyside. Yeah, CDs.
It's not an exchange, it's just a sale.
It's a sale. Okay. So that's the only thing that I'm aware of. Yeah. Okay. Before I hit all of the varieties, I'm just going to mention just a couple of things, just from a health perspective. I often get asked about cooking tomatoes versus eating them fresh. In general, so if you eat them fresh, there's a high content of vitamin C, so they're good that way. But if you cook a tomato plant, they actually release more lycopenes, so antioxidants. I won't get into all of the healthcare benefits of antioxidants. That's entirely up to you. But generally, they supposedly help with anti-cancer type of healthcare. But certainly as you heat and cook tomato plants, they release more lycopene, more antioxidants to a point. So once you've heated them more than 15 minutes in a pan, those antioxidants level off. They don't die, but the longer you cook them, vitamin C declines. So just as a mention of that. Because they're also part of the nightshade family, so I should mention that they do contain a glycoalkaloid called solanine. So like green tomatoes and green potatoes, we're always taught as young children not to eat green potatoes. There is a higher content of solanine in those products. Fortunately for tomatoes, it's mainly in the plant, very little in the fruit, and not many of us eat green tomatoes unless you're frying them up or something. But I just thought I'd mention that. For the plant, they're actually good metabolites because they help the plant fend off pests and diseases and bugs, right? So certainly it's a needed product line for them. So there are more than 10,000 varieties of tomatoes, and I'll tell you, there's more that happens and get crossbred and hybridized every year. So I can't possibly go over the 10,000 varieties here tonight. I will make some recommendations about some plants that I've grown, some varieties that I've grown myself, and from some other sources. But from a home grower perspective, you really only need to be concerned with a few things. So are you wanting to grow a bush variety, or are you wanting to grow a vine variety? So vine's going to grow, as it says, tall and high. The bush is going to grow short and stubby. So it depends on your garden, your acreage, or how you're growing them and where you're growing them. It's funny because when you read a lot of online stuff, they'll actually tell you to grow bushes if you don't have a lot of space in a typical urban garden. I'd almost say if you don't have a lot of space, grow a vine variety because they don't take up a lot of width, right? What do you like to eat? So are you looking to, and how are you going to use it? Are you looking for some different colors? Are you in shapes? So again, these are some of my own tomatoes. You'll see some in the top right-hand corner, which are obviously some Romas that are growing. A lot of cherry tomatoes, some Maine tomatoes there in the top. What are you looking for? Are you looking for big beefsteak slices? Bear in mind, they generally take a lot longer to grow than the cherry tomatoes. And then days to maturity. So as I said, I think that's one of the most important things as a grower that I would pay attention to, especially if I didn't have a greenhouse and I'm putting them in my garden. And I still grow some tomatoes in my garden outside of the greenhouse. To a lesser degree, I mentioned disease and pest because most of the F1 hybrid tomatoes have been grown to be disease resistant. So, and I'll talk about some of the pests and diseases later on. I haven't had a lot of problems with diseases over the years, and I've probably been growing tomatoes for 30 plus years. The most common one that most people will at least see is something like a blossom end rot, which is preventable. So I'll mention this. This is the only time I'm going to mention it tonight, unless there are specifically questions. There is a third type, and so somebody's developed semi-determinates. You won't find them mentioned in very many seed catalogs. And in preparation for this, I've probably gone through 2 dozen or 3 dozen seed catalogs over the last month or two. And there's only 1 or 2 that mention them. They grow generally tall and bushy, so it's a cross between the 2 types, and you do not need to prune them. So just let them grow tall and bushy. As I said, you won't see too many of them in your things. So I'll ask for some questions, and in the meantime, I've posed a question for you at the end. Anybody have an answer? What tomato type tomato smells best? So it's not obvious?
A ripe one, yeah.
It's aroma tomato. And you thought there was a real answer, didn't you? Okay, any questions? All right, so I'll start off with the bushes, determinate varieties. And I've done a little bit of color coding and some items in brackets behind some of the varieties. And I just wanted to mention to you, if it's the purpley blue area, that it's an heirloom variety, because I know people look for heirloom variety tomatoes. I am a great believer in using, if I haven't used a tomato plant of variety before, I want to go and look at somewhere like the All American Selections. You can go online, they'll tell you all of the previous winners for the last 30 years in the tomato category. And you can go and look at flowers, and you can go and look at almost any vegetable out there. And it's the same on the British Royal Horticultural Society. I don't find their websites quite as user-friendly, but there is a PDF file of all the RHS Award Garden Merit winners. So these have generally been tried and tested by a whole bunch of other gardeners out there. So why don't I use that information when I pick a new variety if I've not heard of it before? So I use it as a real good reference. And I've also, behind each variety, put in the days to maturity, approximately. As I said, you go on different websites, you'll find Early Girl here being 60 days. You'll find it in another seed company saying it's 70. You'll see some websites will give you a range because days to maturity is in the ideal test conditions, and our gardens are never that. So, mentioned shorter and bushier, wider, grows approximately about 3 feet in height, much less maintenance. So fertilize, water it, no pruning. You don't even need to remove any suckers that are coming up from the ground. Let it grow. If it gets a little bit too bushy, it's certainly not going to hurt taking off the odd limb, the odd few leaves to get a bit more airflow through the bush. And you certainly don't have to do any sucker removals. This to me is sort of like an ideal plant in the photograph that I found online. I've always said when I grow bush tomatoes, and I grew a couple last year, they're way more leaf than this. And I've never yet grown a bush tomato that one of those tomato cages has worked for me on its own. I always have had to add extra stakes to them, and usually 4 and 5 foot stakes that I'm stopping the tomato plant from falling over because they get so heavy with produce. So as I said, still requires some support. I'd always put that in at the time I'm planting, but I always think you're going to add something later. The bush determinates are some of the best varieties. If you want a small container tomato for a patio or a deck, small little bowl, then any of these. I've grown tumblers for 20 odd years. I will grow at least 2 plants in pots this year. I think they're an awesome producing tomato, and they're so reliable. I've grown tumbling toms before. I haven't done the red robins. Tiny Timmers are an heirloom variety as well. And there can be some prolific producers. I started growing Mamma Mia as a direct result of Lois Hall's recommendations. So some of you older folks that have been around since this book was published in mid-early 90s. It's one of her highest recommendations as a Roma tomato. Some people refer to them as paste tomatoes. I've almost always got the seed from that from Early's out of Saskatchewan. But just a terrific tomato producer. The big thing that I didn't mention, and I'll go back to it here, is producers over a shorter period of time. It's a bit less noticeable here because of our shorter harvest season, but all of the produce on determinate plants come due in a very short time frame, the 2 to 4 weeks or less. So you get a lot of produce all at once. Great for people who want to can. Right, so you're doing all of that produce preparation as well. I mentioned the gold nugget. I specifically grew them last year to give away at the plant swap and sale. And I kept a plant for myself that I put in a small container, like a 5-gallon bucket. It was absolutely awesome. And I will grow another one this year. It keeled over. I had to support the whole container because it was so heavy, but it was an excellent producing plant. And it's an old, now it's been going for 50 years. So it's classified as an heirloom variety, and it's just excellent. It's a small cherry tomato. The Bush Early Girls, I think, have been going years. Manitoba variety is a very old variety, and to be honest, I think there are options that surpass it these days. The subarctic plenty I grew for the first time last year as well. I've grown Sunrise Sauce, which is an orange, yellowy variety of the Romas. Again, produces very, very good, available in the Varieties catalogue that you'll see there. And then there are a bunch of beefsteak tomatoes, but they are a little bit less common in the determinate varieties than they are in the indeterminates, for those that like beefsteak and big slices. Any comments before I move on? Questions? Oh.
Is there like it probably depends on obviously how big the plant gets, but you said it says there's no need for pruning or removal of any of the shoots or suckers, but is there a like, you know, a ideal amount of fruit that each plant can handle or support growing? Because I don't know.
So in the determinates, I'd say it's a little bit less because they will fruit almost all at once in a very short period of time. Yeah. You're not going to improve the fruit size by taking out arms and shoots from the determinate plant. You might. It's more so on the vine. There's some debate over that on vines, whether or not leaving shoots in will produce a smaller fruit than not taking the shoots out. But generally speaking here, you can just let them grow. Just let it, and it makes for a very simple vegetable to grow and less work if you're not looking for more work in your gardening process. I should mention as well that on the golden nugget, the gold nugget variety, they're actually parthenocarpic. So they actually develop fruit without any fertilization. And so they tend to be, I grow a number of cucumbers that have the same trait. And the first fruits that you grow will likely be seedless. But if you're growing them and there's lots more tomatoes around them, they will actually end up cross-pollinating, and your later fruits will likely have seeds in them. So I just thought I'd mention that to you. That's the gold nugget, and it's one of the few parthenocarpic fruits that plant varieties that I'll see. I will mention hybrids versus heirlooms. Just generally fewer disease problems with hybrids, more consistent production with them. I know a lot of folks really like, heirlooms. I don't think the taste you're sacrificing very much. And in general, especially on the bigger tomatoes, there's a better shelf life with hybrids than there are on heirloom tomato varieties. I don't think that's a key item for the cherries. I think it's more for the big beefsteak, slices, where I think it pays a bit more importance. All right. All right, so vine, indeterminate varieties, and if you're English, they'll even call them cordon varieties. God knows they always have to be different, but they are. So, as I mentioned, they're going to go tall, long and narrow. Certainly can grow easily over 10, 12 feet if you want to let them that way. In our short climate, unless you're heating your greenhouse through to the end of September and October, they're fine. About 8 to 10 feet is more than you want. These will keep on producing until the cold hits. That's the big difference than with the determinate varieties. Determinate varieties will tend to produce all at once. You'll get them in all through August. Once you hit September, they've died off a lot. These will keep on producing. You want to prune out and remove all of the suckers. So any suckers that are coming from the bottom of the base of the plant here, you want to remove them. And then where there's, like the photograph shows on the left side, where there are leaf development happening at the axis there, you need to be able to pinch them off. As you mentioned earlier, there is some debate that if you leave them grow, you'll still get the number of overall weight in terms of the number of tomatoes. They may not be as big because you're letting more of the plant take more energy out of them. Lois Hall will say that every tomato plant produces approximately the same weight in tomatoes. If you're going to get an awful lot of cherries versus a few beefsteaks. My only concern about that is beefsteaks are generally very long growing varieties here. And so for most people, you will not get as much out of your beefsteak. If you've got a greenhouse, you might, certainly, but they do take a lot longer growing season, and you'll see that later here. Harvesting window, you'll keep on harvesting until it's just too cold to produce. Canes, trellis. I think there's one of my photographs of my small greenhouse later on, and I use string from the supports from the top of the greenhouse. But as you can see here, somebody's using canes and they're supporting a top structure as well, so the canes all stay together. And you just, as the plant keeps growing, you just keep tying them up to the cane, and it'll certainly grow all the way to the top of the greenhouse there. Oops, sorry. Most heirloom varieties are indeterminates, although there, as you saw on the last slide, there's still a number of determinate varieties. So recommended varieties, and most of these, certainly a lot of them I've grown, with the exception of the beefsteak ones. Cherry, and there's actually the black cherry, and there's actually a chocolate cherry, almost identical. Both of them are heirlooms. Both of them are 65 days. I've grown both. Hang on, I'll let you grab a question. I would recommend the chocolate cherry over the black cherry. I don't think it splits as often. So go back. You've got a question at the back. Sure.
Hi, when you're talking about the indeterminate, And what happens if you only wanted to have it about 5 feet tall because that's how tall you are? Like, would it?
Perfectly okay. You determine how tall you want to let that plant grow, and basically all you're doing once it gets to 5 feet tall, you just got to top the top of it. You can just pinch the top off the growing shoot, and then all of that energy is going to go back into the fruits that are already on the plant. Absolutely. Yeah, good question. Thank you. So more questions? Oh, sure.
Me again.
That's okay.
So the indeterminate ones, when you said that they don't have to, sorry, they'll produce until they get too cold, would they do well in like a hydroponic setup? Like,
I don't have much experience at all in hydroponics, so I'm the guy who have asked that really would help would have been probably Dan's experience, and I think Dan's had no difficulties growing both varieties. He's an ex-member here who's just left town, but he had a water system that was in trenches.
yeah.
Automatic watering, and I don't think he's had any problem. In fact, he's had great success. Yep, there should be no reason why not. So there's a bunch of varieties. More questions? Oh, sure.
Where did you get your parthenocarpic cucumbers from? Probably said that wrong.
West Coast, no, Varieties, and the variety I use is called Summer Dance. You know, any questions over the varieties? I've certainly grown a lot of black cherries over the years, and I mentioned chocolate cherries. Sakura is a very nice red cherry tomato. Sun Gold is very popular. It's certainly one of the sweetest of all. Does anybody know what the sweetest tomato is? Or Sun Gold's very sweet. So Sun Gold's an 8.5 bricks. Sun Sugar's a 10. There's actually a tomato plant called Rosada, and it's a cherry tomato. It's a plum cherry, and it's 10.5, so it just beats it. It is exceedingly difficult to get hold of, and it's called Rosada, Rosada. And I believe what happened is they patented the hybrid seeds on it. And I think the price line put them out of business. So they're exceedingly difficult to get hold of. It's a cherry plum, I believe. So this year I'm giving a go to Midnight Snack, which is sort of like an indigo rose, but a cherry. And I'm also trying Juliet as a recommendation that I heard last year. So I always like to try some new varieties each year if I can. I grow Premio, usually 1 or 2 plants in my greenhouse each year. Jean Flamme I always grow. I like them. They're a little bit high in moisture content, so they don't keep particularly well. Of the Romas, I only have some experience growing the San Marzano, which is obviously a very popular Italian variety, known for being canned. I will say that I got the varieties from West Coast Seeds, and it was very prone in my conditions to blossom end rot, and I don't get that very often. But none of my other plants that season got them, and yet these did. I grow Cobra because it's one of the few varieties that's recommended. It was grown and developed specifically for greenhouses. And I gave Red Zebra a go last year in spite of its exceedingly long maturity dates. I get away with it because of my greenhouse, and it was a very nice producing plant. I mentioned the Brandywine because it's so popular, and the same with Black Krim. There's a number of the choice blacks and chef's choice that are very popular as well. And I know you'll come across the Cherokee purple as well. But as you can see from all those big, large slices, beefsteak varieties, they take a fair amount of growing time. Yeah, I can. It's a multicolored variety. I don't know whether you saw it on some of the slides earlier. It starts out black and the bottom turns pink at the very. It is. It's very nice, and the midnight snacks look like they're a cherry version of it. So, yeah, it's a variety I believe that was developed in Oregon.
Sorry.
Sorry. Questions before I move on? Okay. I just want to double check some of my. Yeah, I think I've covered. So, I will mention in the greenhouses that I mentioned about pruning and stuff. It seems that in greenhouses they keep. I've been asked this question previously before from some of the garden club members, that they keep reducing the number of bottom leaves on our tomato plant. And as the tomato plant grows, I'm always removing the arms from the bottom. I'm letting in more light. The arms are now that die off and no longer touching the floor, so there's less disease that happens. And it seems that in commercial growers, and I know there's some people in the audience here that have commercially grown tomato plants, and I will certainly bow to their experience, they tend to keep a leaf to fruit cluster ratio of 3 to 1. So you've got 3 times more leaves to each cluster of fruit. So just bear that in mind if you end up with it. So, and I'm going to say it might be slightly more than that. Some people say it's anywhere up to 3 to 1 to 5 to 1 sets of leaf arms to one fruit cluster. And it's really to increase light, increase airflow around the plants. Right. They're the dates that you need to pay attention to. So as Sue mentioned, I lived for 35 years up in Fort McMurray. And believe it or not, our frost-free days is longer than that. That's what staggered me coming down here. And it's the higher elevation, proximity to the mountains, that creates the challenge here. Right? So, up in Fort McMurray, south side of my house, I had 9 or 10 plants, and I could guarantee they're going to grow like anything every year, right? As long as I just watched the initial frost like you do here, but it's much more problematic here. It clearly is. And and I threw the Calgary one up. I'm sure that's probably at an airport location for it. I mean, Calgary's such a sprawl. Don't tell me that what's over at Rocky Ridge is the same as what's over by the airport. There's no way. So, those are just guides. You've got to be paying attention to the weather forecast. If you're going to transplant outside, you want to be, we all want to get our plants out earlier. The soil needs to be warm for tomato plants. So only if no signs of frost. If it's going to go lower than 4 degrees, you're heading for trouble. Unless you're providing some sort of shelter. And I garden as well up at the community garden, just outside of town here. And there are certainly people that put them in the tomato cages, and they will cover them in tarps, they'll cover them in blankets, they'll do anything to protect them. Before transplanting out, you've gone and bought a plant, you've gone and grown a plant, and they're growing inside. You want to harden that plant off. Don't just throw it in the ground. If it's blazing hot outside, it's just as bad as if it's freezing cold as well. You'll get it sun scald, you'll burn the plant. So just gradually harden it off. I know folks will say, 7 to 14 days to harden a plant off. I don't know. I don't have that sort of patience. I'll give it 2 to 3 days, and if it hasn't hardened enough, then it's going to die. So plants, tomato plants are best in full sun. We do have a challenge here. If you put a tomato plant up at the south side of your house against a siding or a wall, you can easily burn that plant in our summertime. Our July sun is exceedingly strong. In greenhouses, it's a challenge because you're obviously sort of magnifying that sun at times. And, I end up putting a shade on for part of over my greenhouse for part of the June time period until there's leaf out onto the local trees to provide me shelter. I think, and my experience is, I know it says best in full sun, 6 to 8 hours a day. My personal experience is, yes, you need to give them the 6 hours of sun. They are heat-loving plants, and that's what they love. They don't like being cold. So I know people grow them up in the community gardens, but if you're going to grow a tomato plant, grow them up against a fence, grow them up against a wall, protect them from the wind. And I just think it makes a huge difference if you want to have successful production. I think they need the heat more than they need the sun. And yeah, I've got a greenhouse, but once my neighbor's aspens come out in June, I get a lot of shade in my greenhouse, and it's not affecting the plant production, the fruit production at all. You want to transplant in good draining soil, plenty of organic matter, compost, well-rotted manure. They generally say if you're going to use manure, it should be 3 to 4 months old before you're harvesting the fruit. Bury them deep. So you want to be burying right up to the first set of leaves here. These are called, what are they called? Cotyledons? Cotyledons? Cotyledons. There we go. I knew I'll get the accent right. So these can come off. These are not proper leaves. You can take this off and you can bury this plant all the way up to the first set of leaf, and that stem will then develop root structure, and you'll have a much stronger plant. As I said earlier, if you've got leggy plants and they've got a very high length without any stem, without any leaf, bury it in what's referred to as a trench. So just put a 6-inch slot or 8-inch slot, whatever length your tomato plant is, and just lay it down, still lay it deep, but just gently bend up that stem. And I've grown an awful lot of tomato plants up in Fort Mac that way. It's a very common way of managing leggy plants. But you want good drainage soil, plenty of sun, protect against the wind. So, going back to the very first slide that said, don't keep planting Solanaceae family groups in the same area. If you're in a small house property like I am here in Okotoks, you don't have a choice to do an awful lot of crop rotation around in that. You're probably going to be planting in the same location year after year after year. So, dig a little bit of the soil out, grow in bags. I grow in a greenhouse and I grow in grow bags. And they're not growing in the soil. Keep adding compost every year, and you should manage any problems associated with diseases. Cover with mulch. It's certainly not going to hurt, especially if you're going to be away some of the time. Tomato plants in the ground certainly will manage the watering better than in a grow bag. If you're in a grow bag or a container, you're going to be watering them in the heights of our summer daily, every day. You won't get away with not doing it. Before I move on, questions? Okay. I threw this photograph up. It's an old one I've used previously because it's a very good demonstration of showing you can grow tomato plants of any type in containers. Doesn't have to be anything fancy at all. 5 to 10 gallon container, and they'll grow very, very nicely, very easily. Water regularly. So don't keep changing it up. Water at the same time if you can on a weekly basis. I know our lives don't allow that as easily, but you want to be watering regularly. And they always say water, deeply once a week. I don't know. I just don't find once a week's enough. In the ground or not in the ground. I'm watering my container plants in my garden every day in the summertime. If you're in containers, you've definitely got to do it more frequently. I guess the thing I didn't say is tomato plants are looking for a soil pH of 6 to 6.8. They want an acidic soil. So if you want to maintain that acidic soil, use rainwater. Tap water in general, so I'm talking about public tap water, and I can't tell you about your acreages on well water, but tap water from towns are generally slightly alkaline in nature. Calgary's is, Okotoks is. So using rain barrels and rainwaters is perfect. And if you've got roses, use them on your roses too. Okay. It's a really good way of keeping and using your rainwater. And when you're in watering, take the time to inspect the plants. You want to be looking for bugs. You want to be looking for any diseases, and I'll remove the suckers and those plants that I said grow in the axis. I'm in my greenhouse every day, and I'll still come in there, and there's a 6-inch, that's just growing overnight, it seems like, and I've just missed. You're always missing them. So you want to be pruning and removing the suckers on the indeterminate varieties. Greenhouse, if you've got a greenhouse and you're fortunate enough, maintain that airflow. You want to be running that fan 24 hours a day all summer long, moving the air in and out of your greenhouse. Manage the heat. Provide a shade, especially for the really hot periods of June and July. The ideal temperature range that you're looking for inside that greenhouse is 22 to 28. And we all know we get a lot hotter temperatures than that. I've double dipped on the fresh manure. I mentioned about that earlier. If you've got a big compost pile, it's great. You may not even need anything else to add. Depends on whether you're looking for a very particular organic outcome of all of this or a non-organic. So that's up to you. I'm not going to say which is best, but you will certainly see. Of the commercial fertilizers, I would recommend you're going with a 20-20-20. Some might say you might end up with more leaf because of the high nitrogen content of this. I tend to use this because it's what I read in a Lois Hall book 20 odd years ago, and it's worked for me. When I plant, I almost always add a cupful of granular slow release to each plant as well, and I'll mention that later. Tomatoes are heavy feeders, so every I'm going to say 10 to 14 days, you want to be giving it some fertilizer. If you want to keep them organic, then choose a certified organic fertilizer. And there's plenty of them out there. The one thing you're going to notice in difference is the huge difference in NPK. There's no getting around it. If somebody knows me, can tell me a very good, better source for organic fertilizers that's close to the 20-20-20 soluble that you can get in most box stores or garden centers, then let me know. But almost all of the ones are in the region of 444, and that's a high value. There are often things like kelp, alfalfa, or even less than that. Questions?
For watering, could you add some vinegar to the water to help with the pH issue?
So I'm assuming you could. These are plants I've grown from seed, and I just generally wouldn't do that. I've taken a long time of care and effort to grow them, and it just feels a bit risky. You certainly could add it if somebody's adding it like a tablespoonful to a 2-gallon jug. It's probably okay.
And does it matter if it's chicken or sheep or cow manure?
I don't think it does. If you've left it here for a 3-month to 4-month period, it probably doesn't. I do know there's, there's better people than me for using fresh manure. I grew up always using horse manure with my father in my garden, and that's what I'm familiar with. I do know there's a lot of people do not recommend you using cow manure because of various weeds that get passed on, but I just don't know how true that is. Has anybody got any comments about that? Is it? Okay. I just know from the garden, the gentleman who owned the community garden put some cow manure on one year, and there was a lot of weed problems associated with it, but
Epsom salts.
So I do recommend Epsom salts. Who was the question? Okay, yeah, do I recommend it? So I think if I haven't got it already, I think it might be under my tips section. So the soils in the Calgary region, which are mostly clay-based for the most part. If you're under a rich area, then you're very, very good. But the clay-based soils in and around Calgary are deficient in magnesium. So putting in magnesium sulfate, which is what Epsom salts are, is a very good avoidance of tomato plants and their growth yellowing. So the leaves will yellow in a magnesium deficient grow mix. So I add a cup of Epsom salts every time I plant my tomato plants. I'll add a cup of No, in the hole in which I'm putting my plant in, I will add a cup of bone meal, and it's on a slide here. I'll add a cup of bone meal, a cup of Epsom salts, and a small cup of granular fertilizer that's slow release. I do. I then mix it all in. Yeah. And I'll explain why in a minute why I do them, but primarily in this region. And I'm a rose grower, as some of you may know, and the Calgary Rose Society specifically mentions the deficiency in this region of magnesium. And where I also magnesium helps cell development in plants, and especially when I grow my cucumbers. If I don't put magnesium in my containers that I grow them in, the leaves will go yellow very quickly. Cucumbers are very quick growing plants. I grow long English type cucumbers.
Container, would you add that mix with bone meal and Epsom salts?
So I'm growing them in 10-gallon. Actually, I think they're officially 7-gallon grow bags. So a lot of old vegetable garden growers, just need to keep an eye on the time here. A lot of old vegetable garden growers would put in an old banana skin. So adding potassium and a little bit of magnesium as well in there. And so folks do. Beth, question?
Adding calcium prevent the flower end rot?
It does, but I'll explain, but not on its own. Okay, so I'm actually going to. It's a really good intro into this next section. So I'm going to tell you. So blossom end rot, which is good picture here. It's exacerbated or not. It's often not as big as this, but it is probably the most common problem that tomato growers have, along with, cracking or splitting of the fruit. Blossom end rot is primary cause is irregular watering. So people will say it's lack of calcium. So it's one of the reasons why I put in bone meal into each of my grow bags. But the calcium isn't taken up properly if you irregularly water your tomato plants. So I've let it go dry, and now I give it a dump of water. The fruit will not take up the calcium, and that's what leads to this. So regular watering, and then I'm giving it a second, making sure that it doesn't do it. I add a little bit of calcium into my grow bag by the bone meal. That prevents the blossom end rot. So regular watering along with a little bit of calcium should suffice. Go ahead, question?
Are you preventing it from drying out? Are you always keeping moist soil, or?
So I am growing in containers. I almost never let my plants dry out, ever. I do not take a vacation during the summertime.
So that means is it okay to just like midday, if it's like wicked, if it's dry, you watered it the night before, but midday it's like dry.
Water it then. You are much less susceptible to drying out a tomato plant if it's in the ground. It's far more susceptible if you're growing it in a container. Late season blight, tobacco mosaic, and fusarium wilt. So a lot of the F1 hybrid plants, seeds that you buy will almost say resistant to. I have had no experience at all with late season blight or tobacco mosaic at all. It is not as common. Certainly late season blight here is not as common in Alberta with our drier climate as it is on both coasts. That's not to say we haven't had problems in Alberta, and I will tell you there's been major outbreaks within the commercial growing facilities in Alberta. They actually believe that in general, late season blight dies under normal circumstances in our winter conditions. The concern with it, especially now when we're going back to the family that we belong to and the genus, is that seed potato piles can have a tendency to keep, and pile up a compost heap, you get heat inside of it, and seed potato piles are thought to be a source of late potato blight. But we generally don't have anywhere near the problem that places like Vancouver has. All right, let me just quickly go through some of these so I don't forget my notes here and I tell you the right stuff. Yes, so the last major outbreak in Alberta was 93, but the spores die, as I mentioned, under our normal winters. Cracking, again, or splitting of the fruit generally happens again with irregular watering. I do think there are some varieties, the one I mentioned earlier, which is a black cherry variety, indeterminate, I think is very prone to splitting, and the chocolate cherry alternative is much less so. And I've grown them right next to each other under the same conditions, and I find one tends to crack more than the other. There's nothing wrong with them. You could eat them. They just split a little bit. Don't look maybe quite as nice. And obviously, if you're cracking them in the splitting, pick the ripe fruits earlier, and you'll probably avoid that. Leaf curl, two different types of leaf curl. So if it's on the old growth of the plant, the old bottom sections of your leaf, you might occasionally see them starting to curl up, and it's probably lack of water. And a bit of watering, they'll uncurl and they'll be perfectly okay. If it's on your new growth, then somebody's probably been spraying weed killer in your area, and you'll probably want to get rid of your plant. It's a very common problem that people don't realize. Weed killers can be airborne problems for vegetables. So, you know, a lot of these diseases are dealt with by regular watering, crop rotation, sanitation. So getting rid of diseased plants, taking off the leaves that they're touching the floor or dragging on the floor. But what's one of the best solutions? Companion planting. So, you know, we've grown tomato plants outside for years. There's definitely lots of slugs around these days. Marigolds are a great companion planter. And if you've got a slug queen in your family, it really helps. So I have a volunteer slug queen in my family that picks up all the slugs, certainly up in Fort McMurray. But seriously, slugs can be a slight problem. Grow some sacrificial marigolds around. They help deter them. They will eat some of the marigold plants. There's no doubt about it. But marigolds are good to deter things like nematodes. So there is such a thing called tomato root knot. I've never come across it. And it, you know, the marigolds will also deter those. There are a ton of various companion planters that will help. So everything from asparagus, basil. Basil will even infer its taste into the tomato fruit if you grow basil at the carrots, celery, chives, collards. Almost all of them will help deter. Certainly, you know, things like onions, mint is also a very good one at keeping things like slugs away. Marigolds and yeah, it's marigolds as well, will also help avoid this guy. When it comes to pests, there are a couple, and the tomato hornworm is, I'm not going to say it's common. Has anybody come across them? Yeah, in BC. I found one for the very first time on my driveway last year. So I've never had them on my plants, but they are very common. And, you know, you can certainly pick them off. They're probably about 3 to 4 inches long. They're not exactly pleasant, but they're very noticeable. There are some very beneficial parasitic wasps that lay their eggs on them that will kill them. So, you know which wasps and which insects are good for your garden as well. You know, I haven't been problems in spite of all of the problems I have with aphids here. And I've never seen aphids like I've seen down here at times of the year. My roses can get covered with them, and I'm breathing them in. I've never had any problems with aphids on my tomato plants. Yeah, I know. All right, quickly, I'm going to go through the tips here because I'm running slightly quicker. Plant a variety. So remember I said about the maturity dates, and you know, if you plant a variety of maturity dates, 55-day cherries in a container with some mid-season ones and some late seasons, you're going to have tomatoes all summer long. Don't just stick with one variety, you know, unless you've got very limited space, and I understand that. You know, if you're buying from a box store or a garden center, you know, just make sure there's no bugs on them. I ended up buying some basil from Greengate last year, and I brought home a ton of bugs with it, didn't we? And it's easily done, and it's annoying when you pay for a particular plant you've been looking for. So you know, check them out. You know, a lot of websites say don't buy them if they've already got large fruit on, because when if you're going to transplant it, you know, that plant wants to develop its root system first, and so they'll stop the energy going into the fruits. But You know, I think you just got to be reasonable. Obviously, if you're buying a plant with large fruit on it, it's going to be a lot more expensive. Check out the variety. The one problem I have with going to box stores is you don't have an awful lot of choice of variety. You're much better off going to a garden center and asking them. You're better off growing them from seed. So, transplant deep, buried to the first set of leaves, as I mentioned. There's my recommendation about adding a cup of bone meal, half a cup of Epsom salts, the magnesium sulfate, and add some compost. You want some rich soil in there. You know, cover with mulch and then water in well. And for containers, I probably use a 50% compost mix that I've got tons of compost that I add every year, my own compost into some potting soil, and then I cover with some mulch, and I'm always putting in half a cup of bone meal and the Epsom salts. And I missed off the slow release granular fertilizer as well. Harvest the fruits when ripe if you can. My biggest problem is, using them because you end up with so many. It's season end, so there are a couple of recommendations in the West Coast Seeds book. You'll actually see them say that they recommend stopping watering at the end of July. A number of people, I think that's way too early for here. I would never do that. But if you read the West Coast Seeds, I just read it this afternoon, and they say that. A number of people say stop watering come mid-August, end of August, and the stress helps to ripen the fruits. I don't know. I just don't do it. I keep watering. How about you? I do. I keep watering. If I can keep that season going longer, I'm going to keep it going longer. It just doesn't seem right to me. But hey, I certainly don't know everything. Fruit ripens to water stress. Some grows mid to late August. If you're doing the vine types, yeah, you certainly want to be pinching off the tops at some stage. But, as the lady asked at the end, you're going to determine whatever's suitable, or however high you want that plant to grow. If you're growing a vine type, pinch off the top, and then that energy is going to focus on ripening the fruit. So a couple of quick resources. Hey, join the Okotoks Garden Club. You get great speakers. We have a lot of guest speakers from all over. Calgary Heart folks. My wife does a great job of organizing the speakers. Yeah. And these green living events that we do in joint are just super for the community. Go up to your local community garden. There's a lot of people growing a lot of stuff. Great place to ask. I know when I first came here and I was talked about growing potatoes, I can still remember the old gentleman downtown telling me don't grow potatoes here because of the amount of blight that's on them. I'm not so sure it's totally great advice because I think you can get away with potatoes, but at least I knew what to avoid. The online resources these days are just superb. There's just too many to list. The seed catalogs, most of the websites are exceedingly good. West Coast Seeds is very good online. They'll tell you how to grow your tomato. Want some cheap plants? Come out to the Okotoks Garden Plant Swap and Sale. I think it will be around about the 27th of May. I will have approximately 100 tomato plants that we will be selling. Okay. It's what I brought last year, and there'll be a bunch of varieties there. So. Sorry? Yeah, the Greenland Garden Society has a series of various videos. Some systems you did pay for, some of them are free, but Greenland Garden Society in Sherwood Park is a very good. If you're going up to Edmonton these days, it's certainly one of the good garden centers to go up to. Sherwood Park. I still think this old book is a very basic but very useful guide. It's 20 odd years old now, 25 years old, So varieties have changed, but some of them haven't. Some of them are still tried true, and people are using like the heirloom varieties. It's just a simple book. It's unfortunate it's not in print. But there's a lot of like Better World books you can buy online at a secondhand. I'm sure you can still get it somewhere. It's just a very good start. If you're starting tomato growing, it's a good book. There's a few other local ones. I gave Sue one in case there were some really difficult questions. Yeah, it's from the. It's yeah, it's not specific to how to grow tomatoes. It's very good to how to deal with problems with tomatoes, which is what I like. And then there's some. We're very fortunate in the area. We've got some great garden centers, very locally. You can read them. I highly recommend Garden Retreat as storing to getting seeds, a variety of different types of seeds, just opposite Chinook. You know where Home Depot is, opposite Chinook, just behind there. It's Garden Retreat, very good garden center. Beaver Dam, Spruce It Up, they're all very good. I can't say I've got one as a favorite over the other. I tend to buy almost all of my seeds in December, and I get them all online, and I get them from 3 or 4 different places because I'm looking for specific varieties. There you go. Most of all, have some fun. Take time to enjoy your fruits of your labor, and eat lots of tomatoes. And the one thing nobody mentioned about storage, and storage can be a whole topic unto itself, but don't do this. If you're going to store tomatoes, you want to lay them flat. Put them on a tray, otherwise those heavier tomatoes will squish ones all under the bottom, and you'll end up with a mess. Lay them flat if you can. So it's just practical advice. I'm done. Questions?
I've heard Merle say that if you pick your tomatoes in the morning, they'll be more sweet because the sugars migrate into the fruit over the night, and during the day, the sugar flows into the leaves.
Sounds perfectly reasonable to me. Yeah, that sounds very good. Makes sense. Absolutely.
Fine, let me just start. Would you add a good amount of compost a few times during the growing, or just
No.
at the beginning?
I think if you put a couple of shovelfuls into when you're planting it, it really depends on how much. If you're planting it in the soil, it depends on how much clay you're removing. But as long as you put it in there, I don't think you need to be adding an awful lot of compost. It's certainly not going to hurt if you're using that compost as primary purpose for fertilizing. Then yes, if you're adding additional fertilizer, then you don't need to.
Okay. There's a few coming in. Is the Okotoks Garden Club in person? Do you want to start with that? Or where can they find more information about the garden club?
So it's on the town website.
On the town website. Yes.
Send me an email. We're on Facebook.
Check it out on Facebook, or you can send
So
Susan
Facebook
an
is
email.
probably the easiest.
Facebook's probably the easiest, yeah. And where is the plant swap going to be this year?
We are always going to be on that side of it.
Yes, so we are set up right outside the education center that we are in right now, and we post that online closer to the date.
We start talking about it next.
Okay, sorry, a few questions. Greenhouse or garden, can you plant determinate and indeterminate next to each other, or is it better to plant them a specific distance apart?
So there is nothing stopping you planting them next to one another.
Okay.
Tomato plants are not going to hurt at all. Most of the tomato varieties give you a distance between them. Because I grow in a grow bag in a greenhouse area, the grow bag tends to determine The container tends to determine my distance. So I'll be honest, I'm wanting to jam in as many tomato plants in my greenhouse as I possibly can. So I'm probably growing 16 tomato plants. It's a small greenhouse, 8x8, and cucumbers and peppers and whatever else. Outside, I would just say if it's a bush tomato, the seed packet will tell you the distances, but I would be looking at about 2 feet distances between plants, 18 inches to 2 feet for a bush, a bit shorter for vine type of tomato plants. You can get away with them putting them closer together.
What is your favorite funky shaped variety? Tamara had planted purple fang last year and thought it was very fun.
I don't know. I don't know what the best shaped tomato is. I think Sue said from, the most pretty looking one, I would go with Indigo Rose. It's maybe not the most flavorful. From the most flavorful, I will still go with Sun Gold. Just it's one I grow. Simply because as I'm picking my tomatoes, I'm always popping them in my mouth. They're just delightful. I have a lot of different varieties.
Can you give a little bit more information about crop rotation for tomatoes?
So what I would say is don't grow them where potatoes are. Definitely avoid, and you should never grow potatoes in the same location year after year. You should, if you're growing them in a container, I don't think it makes an awful lot of difference. Change out that soil with compost, and I think you're fine. If you're growing them and you don't have any choice but to grow your tomato plants in the same location, I would be adding as much new compost, taking out some of the old soil, and adding as much new compost as I could the next year. And I think for the most part, you'll be okay. Okay. Just one item that I know I quickly mentioned, missed it earlier, is I know when people look at seeds, all seeds are organic. You cannot buy an inorganic seed. Just bear that in mind. When you look at it, when you look at the site, and they are all non-GMO. The only seed that is potentially non-organic is if it's coated, and very few tomato seeds are coated. There are some, but you can buy, if it's coated, you can buy, and it can still be organic. So it will tell you if it's a coated seed and it's organic. If it doesn't tell you that it's coated and it doesn't tell you it's organic, then you've got to accept that it's inorganic. Non-organic. I've got to, oh,